والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه. So let's talk about truths. Truth with a capital T over here, right? Compared to a truth with a small t, right? So what is the truth? Can somebody tell me what a truth is? What do you think a truth is? What is a truth?
Something that someone holds to be correct in every scenario.
Okay, so the small t truth is something that somebody holds, to be true in whatever the scenario might be, whatever situation might be. Okay, so pretty much an estimate of reality, like what is true about reality. This is what a small t truth is. What actually, what is reality in itself? What is the reality? That's what you're gonna say as capital T. So the difference between the two is one of them is what you as a person and from your limited experiences, whatever, from your interactions and whatever learning and stuff, is what you consider as true of the universe, of what things around you, of the world, of how life works and so on. That's a small t truth, because it may not be the actual truth. It may not be reality. So your perception of reality may not be the actual reality. And so there is a little bit of a difference over there, and that's something that I want to explore over here. And that's where the idea of struggling comes in sometimes, especially when people sort of become overwhelmed by something, and then they sort of take it personally and so on. So this is something that there's a disconnect between the small t truth and the capital T truth. So the truth over here with the capital T are those things that are actually true, as in these are facts. This is how the world works. This is how everything works. That's the capital T truth, and it could be different things. This is, you might have heard it in the universal truth or whatever, but that's what that is. Okay, but what is perceived to be the truth, what is perceived to be reality or fact, that may not be the truth. So there is a disconnect, and that can cause conflict. And when there's a conflict and you don't adapt to it, you don't adjust to it, I'm using those keywords, then in that case, you're going to have a lot of difficulty navigating or proceeding, and it can personally impact you in a negative way. Okay, so let's go to the next topic. So let's talk about learning. So part of our drive, so let's say, right, is to learn about these truths. We want to make sure that our small t truths sort of coincide with the capital T truths, and that is the process of learning. You learn, you accumulate this information, experience, whatever, and you base decisions off of that learning. Meaning that whatever you get, whatever the accumulation of your experiences, all that stuff, right? In the sense of learning, you're going from small t truth towards capital T truth. That's the process of learning. Okay, so how do we learn? Let's brainstorm a little bit. How do we learn? Can somebody give me some ideas? Just brainstorm with me. How do we learn? How do human beings learn? How do you learn? What are some things that you do? And we're gonna see if we can put into categories some of these things that you guys said. How do we learn? How do you learn?
You learn with new experiences.
Okay, so when you have experiences, you sort of take them, you evaluate them, and then you put them in your storage drive, right? That's your brain.
Yeah.
Okay, so experiences are important. And let's talk about experiences. What kind of experiences are we talking about over here? Can we explore that a little bit?
Like say at work, if I have a certain project, like, I don't know, building like a certain thing, like I now have experience to build that in the future. Once I get it one time, then I could use that experience in future projects similar to it.
Okay, so this is positive reinforcement in the sense that it worked and you had some reward that you got out of it. So you're like, okay, going from A to B, going from where I was to where the success lied, right? That process that I utilized over here, in this case, it worked and I was able to get to point B. So therefore, I'm going to replicate this, or I'm going to use this process again in the next iteration of this sort of situation. Okay, that's one way. Okay, what else? And don't feel that like you don't want to say anything because you might be wrong. Again, like we are learning over here, so we're gonna explore and we're gonna brainstorm. We're gonna do all that stuff. So if you get involved, it's gonna help you actually take the message a little bit better, or it's gonna actually have more of an impact on you than if you were merely observing. And by the way, I gave you a hint on one of the other ways of learning. do we learn? How do you do that?
Learn by reading.
Okay, so taking other people's knowledge and applying it. So take it by reading. Okay, so you're seeing what other people are saying. You're seeing what other people did and sort of learning from their experiences. Okay. So there's personal experience that could be good, and so you adopt it. And there's also other people's experience that you can draw from. So you don't have to go through the same process that they went through. So for example, if, in the context of negative experiences and stuff, obviously in positive experiences, you might go to somebody and try to get from them what they did to go to A to B, meaning going from where they stood in the beginning, success light at point B, right? Okay, so for example, if you want to be a millionaire, then you might get interested in, okay, how do I become a millionaire? So you go to a millionaire and say, how do you get there, right? And so you're going to know what they said. Okay. What else? What about taking people as authority and sort of taking what they say? Right? This is different than experiences. Oh, sorry, this is different than reading, because in one case, or you could divide it up into different categories. So, for example, there could be somebody who has gone from A to B, from point A to point B successfully, and so you're learning from their successes, right? Or they made some mistakes in their life and they went through some consequences in a negative way, and so they learned from those lessons and stuff. So you kind of taking that from their learning experience or whatever, right? So that's one way. That's one thing. That's one benefit of reading. But at the same time, you could also read a quote by a random person, and I'm going to show you some inshallah. So by a random person, and you might assume that they're true, even though you have no idea who this person is. Does he have actually actual experience in what he's saying or she's saying, whatever. You might not have any sort of credible account on this person, and so you're just kind of taking it just because it seems right, right? And there was one person who has like these famous quotes, but when like somebody did a research, or they designed a program where they took a bunch of different words and they sort of like let the computer sort of like make quotes out of them, right? Because this guy's quotes were supposedly seeming to be very deep, right? And so these people, they said, okay, let's see if we can like actually see if a computer can do something like that, right? Because some people said these are really deep quotes, some people said these are just like a bunch of nonsense, right? But at the same time, they wanted to evaluate it. So these researchers sort of developed a program. They tried to do something, and they were able to come up with several similar quotes as this person right here. So, anyways, the point over here is that you can take somebody as an authority without knowing who that person is, without even knowing whether that person is even qualified to make statements on that topic, and then you can sort of assume that that information is correct. Whereas another case where a person has actually gone through an experience and you know about it, and that's why you're taking them as credible, and that's why you're drawing from, that's another way of learning. So that's two different ways of learning, and it is taken from other people's stuff, right? One of them is their actual experiences, one of them is just assumed like wisdom or something like that. Okay, so these are some things. Is there anything else that you guys have in mind? This probably is like the easiest one. There's one that I'm thinking of. It's like probably the easiest one to think of. It's the one that essentially makes us Muslim. Maybe it's the hardest one. Anybody have an idea? How about finding out the truths, capital T truths, from the one who set them in the first place? If Allah Azza wa Jalla is the one who designed everything, and then He tells you this is reality, isn't that another way of learning? Going straight to the one who designed something and taking it from them directly. For example, whoever designed the car, you have a car manual. If you open your glove compartment, you should probably see one in there, so you can look through it. Likewise, there's manuals for multiple different things. If you're at work, there's a training manual, right? Whatever it might be, there's some sort of like guidance and stuff from the one who designed it. If you're a programmer, for example, then there's some sort of, like there's some guide manual in terms of how to code, what words to use and stuff, what do they stand for, what function do they serve, and so on. So all that is there, right? So taking from the one who actually knows those universal truths, in this case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? There's no other case. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who designed the system. So taking from him directly, right? That is another source of learning. Okay, let's go to this. So how do we learn? We have divine guidance, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who kind of tells us exactly what we need to know. He will tell you, for example, this is how human beings work. There is shaitan in the picture and stuff. You need to account for him in all your decisions and stuff, right? These are the truths of life and so on. I'm not going to go into some of those details right now. Inshallah, next time we'll go into some of those truths and explore them and kind of look at the difference between capital T truths that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, right? And the small lowercase t truths that sometimes we sort of operate on, right? So I'm trying to give you the difference between how I'm trying to show you where the clashes usually happen, where people get frustrated and annoyed and like all these negative behaviors, where they come from essentially, right? And kind of making sure that clog or that sort of like barrier that comes sort of that prevents us from like becoming happy and so on, and then becoming positive in our life and letting go of these negative behaviors and so on. Where that comes from, where is that obstacle that prevents us from being able to internalize the actual capital T truths, embody them, and navigate according to them, and thus becoming happy, right? Okay, so divine guidance, that's capital T truths, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who designed everything, right? Now, not everyone runs on this, not everyone actually accepts this, and most people, may not even realize that a lot of times they're not running on these things, even though they are wanting to. So, for example, a lot of Muslims, this is just like a normal thing and stuff, right? A lot of times we don't actually learn the truths from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't spend a lot of time from studying the Quran and the Deen in general and stuff, from the Quran and the Sunnah and so on. We don't spend a lot of time learning that. We think that it's a very specific, small scope of our life, and that's it, right? When in reality, it actually covers 100% of our life. Every aspect of our life is mapped out. How you should work, your interactions, with your family, your interactions with your friends and stuff. Everything is mapped out in the Quran and the Sunnah, right? In the sense of like the general truths of how the world works, how you should navigate it, and so on. Everything is sort of mapped out there, right? And the more you learn, the more you realize the truth, and I just said, right? And I'm not just making this up. This is why like the leading scholars of the Muslims, that's why they get so immersed into this, because it actually helps them navigate the world in a way that actually gives them peace and comfort and settlement in their hearts, right? And so this is something that I want you to understand, that there's a direct source of learning those capital T truths that we were talking about earlier, right? And the conflict that arises when people don't learn it, and they sort of try to learn it by themselves in a like a more experimental way. So it's like more trial and error, right? So that's where a lot of problems can come in. A lot of like issues can happen. Okay. And I'm just giving you theories right now. Maybe I'll slip in once in a while some examples, but I want you to understand the concept and just sort of take it for what it is, and kind of as you go along, you're going to start making connections and stuff. And my homework that I give you usually at the end is going to be something related to like thinking about this, exploring this in your own life every single day, and seeing like what we're talking about in actual examples. Okay, so you're going to have your own experiences, and your explorations are going to be those examples, in addition to some other things that I'm going to give you as we go along. So divine guidance is one of them. Another one is operant learning. And what that means is, this is what I mentioned earlier, the concept of reinforcements and punishments. And so this is a consequence-based one. So, for example, Hussein was talking about how there was a difficulty, and then not Hussein. I think it was Hussein. Yeah. So the idea of positive reinforcement. If something works, then you're like, oh, okay, let me try that again. I can use that again. Or it might be that you've tried something and you failed, and you're like, okay, well, that's not going to work. The famous quote from Thomas Edison, and others also have mentioned something similar. But the idea that you keep trying, and every time you sort of like, when you fail, you're like, okay, well, that is not going to work. So so what you learned, the benefit that you get out of this is not to try that same approach again. Although sometimes you might need to, but generally, what the idea is that, okay, if I tried this and it didn't work, I'm probably not going to use this again, right? And if I tried this and it did work, then I'm more likely to use it the next time around. So this is the experience side of things. Okay, another one is associational learning. So for example, this picture right here, what is it that you, what sort of comes to your mind, the first thing that you see when you see the picture? Or what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you see the picture? Anybody? It's in the word, associational learning, right? So what do you see? What do you feel? What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you look at that picture? What are the associations that you're making over here?
Danger.
Danger, okay, good. What else?
Threat.
Threat, okay. What else? What do you think about that guy? Do you think he's a good person?
No, he looks like a bad guy.
Oh, he looks like a bad guy. What makes you think he's a bad guy?
He's got a gun in his hand and he's got a woman choking in his arms.
Okay, that's okay. Keep that in mind over here. Association. That's a word. That's a key word over here. Association. He has a gun. He's holding a woman by her neck and stuff and all that, right? Okay. What if I was to present or to propose another alternative narrative to this? Okay, so that's the key word over here. Alternative narrative, right? A narrative is how you explain things, or what the storyline is, right? So I could define that narrative, right? Or my experiences can, and like the learning that I've done can, or I can change that a little bit. I can become a little bit malleable. So let's use another word, malleable, right? So in this case, what if I was to argue, or not argue, but like present like another possibility, and that is that maybe he's trying to sort of protect himself, and he's been cornered, and he just needs to like get out because some bad people are holding him, and that woman is part of that bad group of people that are trying to harm him. That could have been another explanation, but the explanation that was mentioned, which is sort of like the association that we see with guns and like people holding on to people, because we've sort of gotten used to this narrative that we've sort of adopted it as what must be the fact, right? So our small case, lowercase t, now is something that we're defining this picture by. Does that make sense? So you look at this, all the stuff that you've had in your past and stuff, maybe you've seen enough movies or whatever, and this is sort of what kind of connects it up. Oh, why would a good guy have a gun, right? So therefore, he must be a bad guy, and that's why he's holding the lady and stuff hostage or whatever, so he can run and he can do whatever he wants to and stuff, right? So that's sort of like the narrative that we've sort of adopted, and that's this truth that we've sort of assumed to be the capital T truth. And when reality hits and it ends up sort of contradicting or being different from the small t truth that we've adopted, right, we sort of get flustered. And I want you to remember that, okay? So you can use like the keywords could be flustered, frustration, and so on, competing narratives, and so on. You can use that in here. And I want you to also understand that in the context of Islamophobia and so on, these are the roots of in terms of the conflict. So this idea that one side considers something a truth, so this is their small t truth that they've assumed to be the capital T truth, and then Muslims on the other hand know a different truth, right? And so that competing narrative can cause issues between two groups of people essentially, or in different situations between different things or whatever. So you can two parties or whatever. So you can understand that, and I hope that kind of making sense over here in terms of the connections we're making. So I want you to also start making these kind of connections in your life, right? Okay. So another way is observational learning, and this is learning from other people's experiences. So this is what we're talking about, reading from a book, for example, and saying, hey, okay, well, like you've had experience in here, so let me your experiences. It could also be kind of like going to a lecture and somebody's talking about what they went through in terms of the struggle and how they overcame it, for example, right? And when you guys are sharing this among yourselves, I hope you guys are also picking up on these things, right? How did another person do things and stuff, right? So you're kind of like adapting a little bit. So you're like, oh, this other person sort of benefited like this, so I could probably apply some of those strategies myself as well. So this is kind of always expanding your mind, right? And this is going to be later on discussed, inshallah, in the concept of plasticity of the mind, right? How adaptable, how flexible your mind is. Okay, another one is norms. So for example, if my norm in my culture is to do certain things, right, then I sort of adapt it, then that's sort of another way of learning. That's another observational learning. So for example, I see that when people want to, I don't know, like when people want to go to somebody's house, the cultural norm is that they bring something with them as sort of like a gift or present or something like that, right? Even if it's just a cake or like, I don't know, something, right? So this is something that they do. So this is a norm that I've sort of adapted or adopted, not adapted. Yeah, so that's another thing. That could also be customs, but norms and customs can be a little bit different. So I would just want you to understand the difference. But yeah, this is what we've sort of adapted. And then another one is proverbs and sayings. And this is the thing that I mentioned, where you might read a quote by somebody and you have no idea who that person is. So you have no idea if this person actually like knows what they're talking about, if this person's actually wise or not. But you sort of take it because you see sort of some adoption in your culture, or maybe like it just seems seems fantastic to you. Like, wow, this seems like a really nice quote. It's like a wise quote. Just because you didn't understand it sometimes can also make something else appear kind of deep and wise or whatever. So that these are some ways of how we learn. And I want you to understand this because this is something that we do constantly. And as we do this, it shapes our worldview. Worldview is how you perceive the world, how you perceive the truths of the world, the truth, the capital T truths, right? This is your perception, and this is what we project onto all of our experiences and interaction that we have with people. So how does that work? Imagine these little dots over here, these data points, and you guys, most of you guys probably have done all this stuff, so you guys have an idea. I was going to use a straight line, but I decided to make it a little bit more interesting and kind of more relevant to you, to everyone. That's why I use the curve over here, because life is not a straight line. There's like ups and downs and stuff that happen and stuff. So anyways, these are your experiences. You've tried different things, and these are the results that you've had. And so what we try to do is we try to normalize things, or we sort of try to come up with a normative pattern, a pattern that we can sort of stick to, right? And I want you to remember the word pattern, because in the next slide I'm going to show something, or in the next few slides, that are going to like sort of make you understand something about like how the world is working today, and some of the recent things that have happened in the world, whether it's COVID-19 and like the response to it by the governments, but also by the people who didn't want to wear masks, for example, but also how the Black Lives Movement happened and stuff, right? And the reasoning behind it, the framework behind it, and so on. So I want you to start like kind of seeing how that works and stuff. So over here you have certain dots, data points, right? Some certain experiences that you had, and so to sort of like consolidate them and kind of sort of come up with a narrative, just kind of be able to kind of take that information to like towards a useful benefit. You sort of normalize certain things there, right? So this is that. You have a bunch of different experiences that might not be fitting perfectly on this line, but you've sort of drawn this line over here to kind of get like the gist of it. It's not perfect, but it's something that keeps you going. So it's not like you're treating every single thing as a separate experience and you get a separate understanding for it and a separate line of best fit, whatever. You're sort of like lumping it together and sort of explaining it and sort of adopting like a line of best fit, so that the next experience that you go through, you're going to sort of take whatever seemed to work more often than other things, right? And so that's how you're going to proceed. So for example, Muhammad Ainab was talking about how he lost his wallet. And so he narrowed down the possibilities, and so he excluded where he probably is not going to find it, right? So he started off with things that are more likely to be the case, and that's why I asked him, some questions to kind of explore what was going on, and that's why we had the keyword in the beginning, and so kind of narrowing down the possibilities, and this is what helps us do that, right? And this is how AI works too, and this is how, AI, artificial intelligence. That's exactly what it does. It takes lots of data and sort of starts coming up with patterns and trends and stuff like that. And then that's how it approaches new situations. That's machine learning, essentially, right? So you take information and data points, and you sort of come up with patterns and trends. And then the new information that comes after that, every new experience that the computer or whatever it is experiences, it sort of adapts to it accordingly, right? So for example, on your phone, if you type, if you're like typing a lot, whatever, sometimes your computer, your keyboard sort of understands what you're going to say, so it can suggest it. Gmail just recently started something where when you start typing, it can complete sentences for you, like in your email. As you're typing an email, it can continue. So it gives you suggestions, sort of like grayed out and stuff, and you can just like accept them, or you can like keep typing whatever else. So because it's sort of adapted to how people generally do things and stuff. Now, does it work every single time? No, but for you as a human being, right, the way your mind works and the way that they replicate in AI, right, artificial intelligence, is that you sort of come up with patterns and trends and stuff, and you kind of go with what's more likely to be the case or most likely to be the case, right? And that's how the narrative goes. So you've sort of adapted to whatever is the most likely the case, and you're going to do that, and sort of kind of go to other possibilities that are less likely if the primary possibilities that you had in mind did not work out. So you're going to try to, normalize yourself or try to stick to this line of best fit as much as you can, right? So, and it also makes it a lot easier for you to navigate things because you're not constantly like thinking that I'm in a new situation every single day and stuff. Every single incident in my life is a new experience and stuff. You sort of try to fall back on some things that are tried and tested and stuff, where you sort of understand, because you want to learn about the patterns and stuff. You want to do that because it makes your life a lot easier. You don't want to keep learning new things and stuff. You don't want to sort of feel like everything that you're doing has to be its own thing by itself, and I can't use anything from the past and stuff to sort of fall back on and stuff. Your brain is constantly working and stuff. It's too much a lot of times, right? So people don't do that, and so they have these patterns and stuff, right? But there is good and bad in that. There's good, for example, when Muhammad lost his wallet, and so he narrowed it down, so it kind of helped him not look all over the world, right? He sort of like, okay, well, I can sort of narrow down my search. So that was a good thing. So that line of best fit helped in that case, right? But it can also be a bad thing. Can anybody think of where it could be a bad thing? I gave you hints already. Anybody? How could this normative thinking be bad? Or when could it be bad?
If you narrow it down too much, then you could ignore, like, you could be oblivious to things that you don't know. Like with the picture of the guy, like we just assumed that he was bad and there was nothing else going on, when like really he could have been the good guy in that situation.
Yeah, and what do we call those things? What do we call that? Can you give me one word to define that concept?
Misconception.
Misconception. Okay, what else?
Assumptions.
Assumptions. Okay.
Yeah.
What's the term that's been used right now in the past few weeks, months? In the context of Black Lives Matter, for example.
Prejudice.
Prejudice, good. Bias, right? Stereotypes. That's the bad version of it. There's a good version, but there's also a bad version, right? Now, what happens is this line of best fit that we're talking about, they become what they call schemas. And these are I'm going to define it. I'm going to make it easy. So I'm going to say ever evolving mental frameworks or models by which you govern every new situation, or by which you interact in every new situation that you come across. Does that make sense? So these schemas that you have in your mind, these are sort of models or patterns that you sort of set down, and they're going to continuously evolve. The more you learn, the more you grow, the more experiences that you have, they're going to keep getting adjusted and stuff, And so the elders among us, they have a lot more experience. They've went through a lot of stuff or whatever. They've learned a lot, and so they have a certain sort of 50, 60-year-old evolved model, right? So they've constantly been working on it, and now after 60 years, they've sort of refined it to a certain point. And that sometimes, that's what makes them a little bit more not so flexible, a little bit more rigid in a sense, right? And that's because they've sort of understood that this is sort of after trying so many times, after maybe hundreds of trials and errors and stuff, right? I've come to this understanding right here, which is much different than a 10-year-old or a 20-year-old and stuff thinking that they know the world and stuff, right? Because they haven't fine-tuned it as much. As they're still learning, they're still evolving and so on. And so there's sometimes where the conflict between youth and elders happens, right? On the one hand, the elders can become a little bit rigid in the sense of their thinking, and then the younger ones are thinking that the older ones are too rigid and stuff, and whatever. So both are right, but in their own different ways. Okay, so both are right, but their own different ways, because we understand the world is constantly changing. Even the fact that these frameworks were after constant evolution, the constant adjustments and stuff like that, this constant refinement process. So the youth are right in that sense, because things are different and they're changing, and over time new things can happen and stuff. Nowadays we have different things that we didn't have in the past. We have computers and stuff. Back in the day we didn't have computers. There were no computers, right? In the future there are going to be things that we don't have today. So things are changing. Right? At the same time, though, there are some universal truths, sort of in terms of interactions between people and so on, like manners and etiquette and stuff. Some of those things can be something that's actually correct. right? And so the elders can be right in like experience-wise instead of how to interact with people and stuff. But at the same time, the younger ones can be right in the sense of like things are evolving, so you need to kind of adjust and adapt a little bit, right? So that's something to keep in mind over here. So these schemas, these are based on, these are your lines of best fit, the curves of best fit, whatever you want to call them, that you've sort of like, you know, this is your current working model of how the world works. Your current working model of how the world works, and it must be different for every different person because they have different experiences, right? And that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. So it could be good in the sense that this is, you know, that promotes diversity. It helps you be more creative. It helps you bring to the table something that somebody else might have missed. And so you guys are all looking at, when you all come together, it helps you look at that particular issue or the topic that you're discussing with a more comprehensive understanding, right? That's a good way to do it. But it could also be a bad thing where there's can be like, you know, conflict and stuff because people don't understand that maybe the two people that are arguing with each other are arguing as two different aspects of the same thing, but they're thinking and talking about the same exact thing, right? And so there's conflict and stuff and misunderstanding and all that stuff. So that could be a negative aspect of it. So keep this word in mind and keep this idea in mind, the mental framework that you have. Okay, now talking about stereotypes and biases. There's the good kind of stereotypes and biases, and there's the bad kind, right? So biases can be the category of prejudice. There's different definitions of it, but the more general definition is sort of your understanding, the norms that you've understood. So pretty much like your thoughts or, you know, your understanding of how the world works and stuff, right? And some of that could be true. Some of your small t truth could actually be capital T truths, and some of them may not be. I hope that makes sense, right? And so some biases can be good biases and some of them can be bad. For example, if you use a bias of like, you know, let's say there's a fire somewhere, right? Or maybe like, let's say there's like let's say you go to a prison, right? And so you're sort of like, when you're walking in, you're kind of like, you know, walking through the aisles of the inmates and stuff, right? You're sort of being very cautious and stuff, right? Because you're surrounded by what appears to be criminals, and they might be criminals and stuff. So you're taking your caution, right? So taking your caution in that sense is not a bad thing, right? Or when you at night when you lock your doors, or you know, you lock your car doors or something like that, that's not a bad bias. That's a good bias because that can actually help you stay safe and so on, right? But it can be wrong in a different context, or maybe like, you know, a different bias could be a bad bias. So understand that bias as a word, as a concept, is not necessarily bad, but it's how it's misapplied sometimes when it can be bad. When it's applied in the right way, it's good, right? But if it's applied in the wrong way, then it's bad. Stereotypes are like that, you know, pretty much. For example, I might think that if I look at a black person, right, and I'm saying like how the narrative can go, right? I'm not saying that this is how we should think and stuff, right? But you might look at them and say, well, these people, they have these negative qualities and stuff, so I'm not going to be, you know, I'm not going to interact with them, I'm not going to associate with them much, right? This is definitely a concept, for example, in the Muslim world that are non-black community, where, for example, Desis or Harabs or whatever and stuff, they have this, like, they look down on black people, and so marriages and stuff are like taboos and stuff between these races, right? So understanding that is going to help you. Understanding the source of all that can help you sort of navigate the situation and sort of break free of these negative normative patterns that we sort of adapt, right? Or these models that we've sort of put in our minds and stuff. So being flexible in that, being plastic, is going to help you sort of break free of those things, and then understand that your small t truth may not be the actual capital T truth, and that's where conflicts can happen. Maybe that, you know, maybe black people are smarter than us. Like I'm saying us as in, like, you know, they see and stuff, right? Maybe they're smarter than us, so I need to accept that possibility, right? Just because in certain experiences that I've had, they might have, you know, seen a different way, it doesn't mean that everyone has the same, you know, the same predispositions, or right? For example, Abraham Lincoln, he did, you know, the Emancipation Proclamation, and he's famous for that, but that wasn't his mindset necessarily. I don't know if you guys know, if you do some research, you'll find out. And I did some research recently, and I posted in a group chat of different presidents and stuff, and how the systemic racism was kind of like a big problem, where it stemmed from, and how it was like a ongoing thing since the beginning of American history and stuff, right? And going back to, like, you know, hundreds of years, not just like the beginning of, like, not just from the independence, but even before that. But the idea, for example, Abraham Lincoln thought that we should teach these these Africans, or these like blacks and stuff, these slaves or whatever, or former slaves, we need to teach them, and we need to sort of like kind of train them to be civilized and so on. But he had this conflict. He didn't think that you could put black people. He didn't think that black people and white people are equal. Okay, this is might be a shock to us because of the patterns or these, like, this mindset that we've developed over the course of time. That might be a shock because that's what we've learned, right? That's what we learned. So that learning, because it was an experimental thing as opposed to divine truths that are giving to us directly, this idea that okay, based on my observation, these people, they're not educated and stuff. They don't have this refinement of culture and, like, like that, the way they carry themselves, this demeanor and stuff, right? They don't have that, right? So automatically assuming that therefore they must be inferior to white people, that was the understanding back then, right? And it kind of sort of continued onwards. And so Abraham Lincoln thought the best solution for peace and settlement and everything was to have black people live on an island at a different place versus the white people. So he said, no, we should definitely treat them with respect because they're human beings and stuff. But at the same time, I don't think they're equal, and they should, the solution that he was proposing, and there's a lot of discussion, you can see it's like writings on this, that his proposition was that black people should be put into like a different island in a different area, that we give them, completely, but it's for them, because he didn't think there was a way for black and white people to coexist, because he considered them, they're not equal in terms of their, whatever, I guess like predispositions or their build or their minds or whatever and stuff like that. So he considered them inferior. And there's a lot of discussion of other people kind of doing the same thing when they consider black people, a certain way. So I want you to understand how our attempt to learn the capital T truths, right? Or how our attempts to learn the capital T truths often lead us not to know those actual truths. And as a result, even though we're assuming this, they're assuming that we've sort of understood the capital T truths. As a result of not knowing those truths and assuming that we have understood them, we have conflicts with other things or with other, experiences that we have in our life, right? Whatever that might be. If you lost your job, right? You might think that, maybe your boss was a terrible person. Maybe like you're not good enough or whatever and stuff. So this kind of sort of impacts us in a negative way oftentimes. And this can lead to depression and anxiety and stress and worries and frustration and annoyance and all that stuff. And that can lead to negative interactions and negative experiences and stuff like that. So with that, I want you to understand that our objective, in terms of learning, is to learn the capital T truths. So we should always understand that there is one source, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who gives us that capital T truth, right? At the same time, need to understand that, as we're learning, we may not have actually understood it based on our previous experiences, and when we go to something other than the source of the truths, right, that we need to become flexible and adaptable, and we need to do this all of our life. So whether we're 90 years old and we think that we've understood the world and we're good to go and stuff, or we're 10 years old, it doesn't matter. We need to understand that our objective at the end of the day is to learn the capital T truths, i.e. reality, right, and that our understanding thereof so far may not actually represent reality. And so we need to be flexible. We need to understand that. And the more we're flexible, the more we're adjustable, the more we're adaptable, the easier it is for us to navigate difficult situations. So this, and then we're done, inshallah. And these are just some quotes that I want you to look at. Now I'm giving you this stuff, and you might have thought that these are universal truths because they just seem so nice, right? Hard work plus dreams plus dedication equals success. You were thinking, man, like if I just put in hard work and I have a certain dream and I just commit to it, I don't give up. Remember we talked about that last time about discipline, right? So I just continues to do it, right? This right here is going to give me success. Now, if I take this as a truth, capital T truth, but reality hits me, and maybe the stuff that I was doing was not the right stuff, right? And it was going to cause me harm, but I assumed that it's not going to because of my normative thinking, whatever schema that I had in my mind, right? And so I didn't get success. You see how it can sort of like cause a lot of conflict and depression, in a person. So this is something to understand over here. So just because it seemed good doesn't mean it's true, right? But that's what we do. We assume that it's true and we go forward because it just makes sense. It's just something that we want to accept as true. You get what you focus on, right? Of course, this could be interpreted in different ways, but let's assume one assumption or one way of interpreting this could be if you put your mind on something, you'll get it, essentially, right? That's not necessarily how that's how Dad told us life works, right? But if you assume that this is how you're living your life, right, then that's where the conflict can happen. You can get overwhelmed and so on. Another one is make your life a masterpiece. Imagine no limitations of what you can do, what you can be, have or do, what you can be, what you have, and what you do, right? Obviously, we know from the universal truth, the capital T perspective, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us so, that's not necessarily true, right? There are limitations in our life and stuff. As simple as, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَوْ بَسَطَ اللَّهُ الرِّزْقَ لِعِبَادِهِ لَبَغَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَبْسُطُ الرِّزْقَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. That if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to expand the risk of his ibad, like expand them, like give a lot of stuff or whatever to people and stuff, right? Some of them would transgress boundaries, and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is he's wise, so he portions based on that understanding. So maybe you want to be a billionaire, right? But maybe it's not good for you, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to give it to you. But if you think that I could become a millionaire, I just have to become a millionaire, and then you're not becoming a billionaire, then it's going to overwhelm you, frustrate you. You might even give up, and you might even start questioning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because you assume that truth, the small t truth that you've adopted, must be the capital T truth, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed the system with, right? And so you assume that, and when that didn't happen, you sort of kind of got frustrated. And this is where you're wrong in the sense of projecting your capital T truth from your limited experiences and learning, whatever, to the entire rest of the creation. How is it that you define the rest of the creation? You can't, right? You're just a tiny little piece in the entire creation. If you look at the world, if you look at just North Carolina, if you just look at your house and you stand in a corner, you're not even like 1% in terms of the volume of the house, right? So how is it that you're going to define everything else in the universe and the creation, right? So you can understand that. And then follow one course until success. Like you're just trying over and over again. Like imagine you're in a maze, right? And there's one door, and then the rest of them are like walls and stuff like that. So you go to a wall and you start banging your head on it and start trying to make it like open and stuff, but it's not going to open because it's not a door, it's a wall, right? But you keep on pushing, so you're following one course until you get success. That's not going to work. So you're going to get frustrated because you're like, I'm trying, I'm sticking to this course. This is what the person said, and I'm doing it. It's not working. You understand? So I hope this makes sense. And with that, inshallah, I'm going to give you this homework to kind of understand, to reflect on what we just talked about, and think about how in your life, as you go forward, every single thing that you do, it comes from that pattern that you have in your mind, the schema that you have in your mind, this model that you've sort of adapted of what the truth must be, of how life must be, how reality must be, and you're just kind of navigating according to that. And when you understand this, you can break free of that cycle. You can break free of all the stress and worries and stuff that can cause when your small t truth conflicts with the capital T truths of reality. So with that, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.